Well, that is continually my favorite part of service, and I'm excited to keep watching them lead us and help us find more of what God's doing through their own walks. We'll give them a second to get upstairs. Last week, I had, as I mentioned, kind of prepared a thought of my own, and it was surrounding the idea of disorientation. And then I was like, could I use it this week? And it's really hard to talk about reorientation unless there's been some disorientation. So I'm going to do this in a couple parts. I'll speak a little bit, then we'll sing some more. And then I'll come back up here in a few minutes and finish the story. But to begin, I want to take you to a time machine. All right, does anyone remember where they were the year 2008 in the month of January? Some of us? Okay, I'm getting a bunch of looks like, yes, we very much remember. So the reality of my January 2008 was a 19-year-old freshman at Oklahoma Christian. I had been playing indoor soccer with some friends and unintentionally was turning to move from a ball that my friend was clearing, and the ball just friendly fire drilled me right in the side of the head. Now this happens in soccer. My ears were ringing. It was a pretty big shot. But I didn't think much of it. I went to bed that night, and I woke up the next day, and there was a knot on the side of my face. I thought, well, I hit really hard with a ball yesterday. There's probably going to be a knot there. So again, I didn't think anything of it. Well, a few weeks went by, and the knot didn't go anywhere. So fast forward to July of that year. Within like a week, in two separate instances, both my mom and my dad, when talking to me, kind of paused and said, "Corey, what is that thing on the side of your face?" I said, "Well, guys, that's where I got hit with the soccer ball, duh." And they're like, "Yeah, that shouldn't still be there." You can kind of see on the right side, it's a little puffed out there. They wanted us to go get it checked. So a couple of warriors, I thought, yeah, you know what, we'll go get that checked out, whatever. So we went in and did a needle biopsy. They took a little extract of it and came back. The biopsy was inconclusive. So they wanted to go in and do a surgical biopsy. No big deal, like a 40-minute procedure, slice off a small little bit and biopsy that and get the results from that. And so it was September of 2008. In fact, September 18th was the day. I was a few weeks into my sophomore year at Oklahoma Christian. And I was actually interning for Memorial Road's youth group. And so that was my new kind of setup. And my major was broadcast journalism, thinking I want somebody to pay me to talk about sports when I'm older. That would be great. And this was a 19-year-old Corey. So on September 18th, we got a call that was a bit jarring. We went into the doctor's office to get the results of the test. My mom and my dad and I sat there, and I kind of remember us killing time in the room before the doctor walked in. And the doctor came in, and he sat down, and he looked at me, and he kind of explained, "Corey, it turns out what this is you have a mucoepidermoid carcinoma." I said, "Well, sure, doc, that makes sense to me, but put it in layman's terms for my parents." And so he went on to explain, this means you've got a cancerous tumor. And this is not seemingly a huge form of cancer, but we do need to treat this pretty quickly. It was in a weird spot. Not a thing you expect to hear. I was 20 years old at the time. But I'd had a bunch of health issues before, and it wasn't all that jarring. And so they had set me up for radiation treatments. This was really the only course of action. It wasn't in a spot where chemo was going to do any good. And so for 10 weeks, I remember vividly, I would go to my class at Oklahoma Christian, and I'd get done at about 9:45, and then I would drive over to the radiation clinic on Bryant in Edmond, where they would strap me down to a big table and leave me in a room alone for about 10 minutes while a giant laser shot beams at my face. And then they would come in and unlock me and tell me I was free to go. And it was actually pretty simple. Radiation's not all that bad. I did that for about 10 weeks. I would then leave radiation and go to Memorial Road and take on whatever the internship had in store for that day. That semester really wasn't that bad. It was a little unorthodox, but by and large, it didn't really impede too much on me until December. We went back in, and doctor kind of looked at it after a few months, and it turned out it wasn't getting bigger. The cancer had kind of intensified. In fact, the tumor was growing. The radiation wasn't helping. It seemed to be having an inverse effect. And so surgery was now kind of the mode of operation. I was going to have to be put into a procedure where hopefully the facial structure and nerve and everything could be left intact, but they wanted to get this cancerous tumor out of my head, which makes sense in hindsight. But I was set for surgery on January 19th of 2009, and it was performed by a doctor, and you can't make this stuff up, a doctor named Jesus Medina. And the surgery went swimmingly. I mean, it was really well. They were glowing on the other side of it, excited about how it went. It was smooth. They can preserve the nerve. Everything looked as good as it could until the pathology report came back. 7 days later, they kind of gave us the news, yeah, the cancer has spread. We didn't actually get it all, and now we're kind of down to one option. We need to go in there and take out all the facial structure, the muscle, the tissue, the nerve. And I said, well, can you guarantee me that this works? And they said, we can't really guarantee anything at this point. And so, full disclosure, between January 19th, I guess the 26th when we got that news, and 50 days later, March 16th, I believe, when I actually got a second procedure, there's an entire book probably to be written about what I went through for a couple months in trying to decide what to do next. Life had disoriented me in a way that I didn't really know how to grasp anymore, and I couldn't keep up with my school. I dropped my semester of classes. I couldn't keep up with the internship. I pulled out and was on a hiatus, and it was a stretch where I remember God was doing a lot of heavy lifting. I'm going to continue this story here in a few minutes, but before we get to the rest of that portion, I want us to be aware that all of us have levels of disorientation in our lives that are very real, maybe constant, maybe current. And those aren't things to act as if they don't exist. But as we lean more into a few more songs of worship, and I'll, like I said, share more of the story on the other side, let's try and reorient our spirits to where God is pouring into us right now. So, well, I mentioned there was a book to be written. Details include really difficult conversations with family members, things that weren't ideal for anybody's capacity, but a processing of which we all had to do in our own times, and a turning point that involved the Wichita Mountains and a day traveling down there with Phil Brookman for a hike that gave us a pivotal point, but that's for another time. The end result was on March 19th of 2009, about 2 months after the first surgery. I went in to have a facial reconstruction surgery, which 2 surgeons were to perform. The first one being the same Jesus Medina, who I'd worked with already. He went in and took all the stuff out, cut out the muscle and the tissue and the nerve. And then the other doctor, I think about 5 hours, 6 hours into the procedure, took over and started grafting me back together. Now, this is something they'd explained to me beforehand. It was very unique. They cut a 13-inch incision in my left thigh where they took a bunch of muscle and tissue to put back in my face, and they had about a 2-inch incision on my collarbone where they took out a nerve to put back in my face. And so, all in all, these 2 surgeons, Dr. Medina and Dr. San Clement, who, maybe I shouldn't say this, my family he was super talented, gifted guy, loved him to death. We kind of remembered him as the spitter because in our pre-consult interviews, a bit of a 'tis the fountain free type of dynamic whenever he talked. Either way, he was a godsend, and he was really the man who reconstructed my face from different parts of my body, but these two surgeons were placed there in no coincidental fashion. And the surgery went well. It lasted 18 hours. But when I woke up and things had been kind of settled through, we got the pathology back, the cancer was gone. However, this didn't really feel like a victory over cancer, per se. There were a lot of things that I'm now trying to figure out. One of them I first remembered, my face was fully paralyzed, both in feel and touch, or movement rather, for 2 years. At this point, I have some movement back, and you can see it, but the result of the surgery, and that's a bit of a graphic picture there, but just to give you an idea of where they had to sort of peel my face back and put it back together. I realized while trying to brush my teeth in the hospital a few days later, and then trying to rinse my mouth, that I put the water in and tried to swish it around, but I swished it straight back out onto my shoulder and everything else. And I realized, my mouth doesn't work quite like it would have otherwise. My eye, in fact, didn't close on its own, so they had to put a little gold weight in there. There's still in my eyelid a gold weight that helps it to stay closed at night. And this was kind of a relearning process through that. Sometimes a shower with ill-advised shampoo running down and you can't get to it in time. It's a bit of a hassle. The bigger one was my leg. I had to kind of relearn walking after a few months after the trauma that had gone through with my leg. And in a lot of ways, I was getting reoriented to my new normal. This wasn't how I intended to spend my 21st birthday. But it was the hand that we got dealt. My plans notwithstanding, God's hand in working through this series of events and offering it to me as something to be used later on is beyond clear to me. It still is a bit of an issue. I can't sit here and tell you that everything's perfect now. I deal with stuff regularly every day that I still have to maintain and adjust accordingly with. But it's a reminder of what God has done through this experience. And the enemy has a tendency to want us to dwell in the past. And what I mean by that is, for me, he would love for me to sink in to this season and relive these emotions and feel that daunting, sort of overwhelming presence that I was going through at the time. He would love for me to get sucked back into what went wrong, what I missed out on, and all the things I lost through this equation. And he would have me do it with no perspective of what I've gained, with no idea of what it is that God has offered on the other side, and the fact that true growth starts from discomfort, being disoriented. The beauty of having a God that allows us to go through seasons that might be super disorienting in ways we are not prepared for is that he has in store for us a reorientation that is even better for us and those around us if we're willing to accept what he's doing. And if this story shares anything with you this morning, let it be the same message that it stuck with me on. About 9 months after my actual final surgery, I went and got the only tattoo I have tattooed on my back, a portion of Job 121 after he's lost everything in that first sequence of events, where his sentiment towards God is simply, the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. If the story is helpful for anything this morning, let it be a reminder of that God gives us exactly what we need, even when it's not what we want. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised.